Worst case scenario. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming tonight. My name is John Stankwitz. I'm Chief of Police here in Long Meadow. 15 years ago, I was standing on this stage, well, not this stage. Hello. I'll start all over again. Thank you and welcome. My name is John Stankwitz. I'm the Chief of Police here in Long Meadow. 15 years ago, I was standing on this stage. Well, it wasn't this stage in particular. It was a stage at Long Meadow High School, a former Long Meadow High School. And at that time, we had a symposium dealing with alcohol and marijuana issues. And at that time, I never dreamed that I'd be here 15 years later talking about something about heroin. This is something that didn't even occur to us at that time. This was so foreign to us here in Long Meadow. Unfortunately, tonight we'll be talking about opioid and heroin use. We'll be hearing from, we have some professionals, both police and fire. We'll talk about their interactions within the community, what they have encountered. We will also become familiar with the signs and symptoms of heroin use. We'll also hear from State Senator Eric Lesser, Long Meadow native, and he'll talk about what he has found at the state level. District Attorney Anthony Gallooni is also present. He'll say a few words about his proactive initiatives here in Hampden County. We also have Substance Abuse Coordinator from Long Meadow High School, Shelley Warren, who will be saying a few words, and Marcy Julian. She will speak about her project, which is Learn to Cope. And we also will hear from a brave young man who, a Long Meadow resident himself, who survived the tumultuous world of heroin addiction. So we have an interesting and insightful program for you tonight. And with that, thank you. I want to thank you for coming, and I'm going to turn it over to Detective Mazzaferro.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Long Meadow Emergency Services have seen an increased number of calls relating to heroin. Officers have responded to overdoses. They responded to shopliftings, car breaks, house breaks, and even in one case, a car crash, all connected to heroin. In one case, we had an individual driving through town who was actually shooting up heroin while driving and overdosed and crashed. Long Meadow officers have also responded to our area parks and parking lots where they have found use of heroin partaking in those areas. As public safety officials, we have many different responsibilities. One of those responsibilities is our responsibility to educate our community. And that is what our goal is tonight. It's to provide you with education and resources so you can be prepared and obtain answers. Addiction knows no boundaries. Addiction affects all races, ages, and social backgrounds and demographics. And for those who out there who have an addiction, and for those parents out there who have an addict in their home, you are not alone. We have the resources here tonight to help you. Our first speaker tonight is going to be Senator Eric Lesser. He grew up here in Long Meadow. He's a Long Meadow High School graduate. He was elected to the Senate in 2014. Since his election into office, he has passed significant new laws related to substance abuse and treatment prevention. I'd like to welcome Senator Eric Lesser.
Well, thank you, thank you very much, and just a quick thank you and shout out to Chief Stankiewicz, who is my DARE officer actually here in Long Meadow. I'm a graduate of Long Meadow High School, Williams Middle School, and Blueberry Hill School, so this is certainly a familiar community to me. And I also want to thank our District Attorney, Anthony Gallooni, who's been a tremendous partner on this issue. I'll be brief in my remarks because I want to make sure that the experts and our police and fire get back to the program here. But I wanted to just share a few statistics to give people a sense of how urgent this crisis is, and it is a crisis. It's a public health crisis, and that Long Meadow is both not alone in what it's facing and is not immune from what's been happening in our broader state and unfortunately in the country as a whole. On average in Massachusetts, 4 people a day are dying of opiate-related overdoses. An average of 4 people a day are dying. That does not include everyone suffering from addiction or facing a challenge, or their families. In 2014, which is the last year we have concrete data, more than 1,200 people just in Massachusetts died from heroin or opiate-related overdoses. To put that in perspective, that's more people in 1 year dying from opiate-related causes than from guns and car accidents combined. So more people are now dying of this epidemic than car crashes or gun-related deaths combined in our state. So we are facing a really unprecedented public health emergency in Massachusetts, in the broader Northeast area, and in the country as a whole. One other statistic I'll share that gives a little bit of context to what we're facing. About 75%, a little more actually, of those 1,200 deaths in 2014 of heroin overdoses started with people abusing prescription drugs, in particular narcotic painkillers like OxyContin or Percocet or things like that. So we know that the gateway to a lot of the heroin addiction that we're seeing and the resulting deaths from that addiction is beginning with prescription drugs. So a strategy around limiting the supply of those drugs and getting a better handle on the consumption and preventing some of the abuse of those drugs is of paramount concern. I thought I would share a few things that we've done on a state level and a couple things that we are planning to do in the next few weeks and months that will help get a handle on this, and then I'll turn it back over to the rest of the program. First, we worked very hard to get a new bulk purchasing program set up for Narcan, which is an anti-overdose drug. And I know that there's going to be a demonstration of the Narcan use here tonight. For people who are not familiar with this drug, it has a 97% success rate at reversing an overdose and literally saving a overdose victim's life if it's applied correctly and in a timely way. The price of this drug was skyrocketing over the last several years. It had started at about $16 a dose, was selling at $66 a dose last year, until we passed legislation that I authored and was signed by Governor Baker to set up a new bulk purchasing program. Make a long story short, happy to get into the details in another location, but make a long story short, we were able to get the price pegged at $20 a dose and set up a new trust fund to help local cities and towns purchase the drug. And proud to say, with your chief's leadership, Longmeadow is one of the participants in that program. So we're going to see more Narcan accessible for our first responders in Longmeadow, and actually in several surrounding communities in the Pioneer Valley as well are also participating in that. Another bill that I authored that was signed by the governor this summer, which is now also the law of the land, is a new beefing up the reporting requirements for our prescription monitoring program. So now the pharmacies, Walgreens, Rite Aid, CVS, are required within 24 hours to report to the Department of Public Health any issuance of a set of highly addictive narcotics that we know are gateways to abuse and can be gateways to heroin use. The old reporting requirement was 7 days. We've gotten it up to 24 hours. The eventual goal, hopefully next year, is to get this to real-time, instantaneous reporting once we're able to get all the computer systems updated. And this is going to be a very, very important tool for public health officials and for law enforcement to be able to spot basically pharmacy shopping before it becomes a public health threat. So if a person is, maybe forging a prescription pad or stealing a prescription pad and is stopping at pharmacies all over the area to try to get those filled, we now have a mechanism in place to flag it and to get help. I'll close by saying a few more things we're doing. We have a big, comprehensive substance abuse bill in the legislature right now. The Senate has passed a version, the House has passed a version, and the governor has proposed a version. We're now in conference to get that finalized and get that to the governor's desk. I am urging as speedy a conclusion to this as possible because, again, if you remember what I said at the beginning, 4 people a day are dying, and every day that we delay this is literally a lost chance, a missed chance to save a life. That bill will eventually have 2 components in it, and I'm happy to discuss this at more length if anyone has questions. The first is we need to do more around prevention in the first place. So there's going to be new funding for educational programs at our schools, new funding for early screenings going as young as middle school, also increased public education campaigns, and very importantly, more resources for community groups and for parents to understand what's happening with their kids. The other component that we are going to be doing quite a lot on is treatment. We have to do both. We have to help people who are currently suffering, and we have to prevent more people from falling into the trap of addiction. So what we're doing is we're going to be increasing funding for treatment. We're going to be increasing funding, for example, for group home sobriety models and other sort of evidence-based treatment methods that have been shown to work. And we're going to be also expanding the number of treatment beds. In last year's budget, we were able to get 250 more, which frankly is a drop in the bucket in terms of where the need is. We're going to be beefing that up significantly, and I'm going to be working very hard to make sure that we get more beds in Western Massachusetts, because another issue we've seen come up over and over and over is, first, it's incredibly hard when someone does make that courageous decision to get help to find those available treatment options. And secondly, once we do find bed space or treatment space for people, they're often located in the eastern part of the state or far away. And of course, family networks are very important for this, so we need to make sure that people actually stay close to their families rather than get pulled away from their family at a sensitive time. So that's what's going to be coming up. I would really encourage everyone to reach out to me, to contact us if you have thoughts on this issue or concerns or questions. But you have an obligation from me and a promise from me, which is, certainly can't promise specifics. Nothing in life is a guarantee. But one thing I can promise is I view this issue as the most urgent and the most pressing public policy challenge that we have in Massachusetts, and is a life and death issue, and I view it as a life and death issue. And when you face a crisis like this, when you face a public health emergency like this, you have to respond to it the way you respond to a crisis, which is putting everything you have into it and having the community and everybody involved in the community behind it. And that's evidence from tonight. So I'm going to take what we learned today and from what we hear today back with us to Boston. And I really want to thank everyone here for being here tonight and for showing that dedication and taking this on. And I would really encourage you, if you have questions, if you have concerns on anything at all, or suggestions as we move forward, to please reach out. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. District Attorney Anthony Guluni was elected to the Hampden County District Attorney's Office in 2014. Since being sworn in, District Attorney Guluni has taken to the front lines of the heroin crisis in Hampden County. DA Guluni has been active with community symposiums such as this. His office has sponsored former NBA Chris Herron to speak at different community programs. And this past January, the DA has formed a task force to fight the opiate crisis here in Hampden County. I'd like to welcome District Attorney Anthony Guluni.
Good evening. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm proud to be here as District Attorney. And I want to thank everybody here for coming and spending your evening, and I think it's a demonstration of how serious this issue is, and it's so important that we come together and that we build understanding around the issue. I can't go tit for tat with Eric in terms of my roots in Long Meadow, but a little known fact, I do have some roots in Long Meadow. I was educated at St. Mary's School from K through 8, so 9 years I spent in Long Meadow. Despite being a Springfield resident and someone who grew up there. So I think what's so critical to understand and what's the kind of foundation of tonight's event is to understand that this issue is in Long Meadow. Despite this beautiful high school, despite everything that you have in Long Meadow and a great police force led by Chief Stankiewicz, who is doing a great job, this issue is all across the county. And this is a county that's very demographically and socioeconomically diverse, but it's everywhere, and it's in Long Meadow, and it's important for those of you who are parents of kids in the high school or even the middle school to be aware of this issue. And I don't want to steal anyone's thunder who's going to speak after me, particularly Marcy Julian, who's a great colleague and friend, who will talk to you about some of those warning signs. But, with that understanding, it's here. And for those of you who are parents, who are aunts or uncles, who are around kids, who are teachers, nurses, counselors in schools, it's so important to understand that this issue is present in places like Long Meadow, present in this very school, and you have to be cognizant of some of the warning signs and some of the issues that precede addiction, whether it's someone who's prescribed medication as a result of a sports injury, whether it's a young person who's drinking or using substances like marijuana. Very often these things are precursors to opiate abuse and opiate addiction. And needless to say, it's much easier to prevent than to deal with addiction once it strikes. So, that's kind of a good segue into the work that I'm doing as district attorney and the members of my office who work very hard on this issue day in and day out. And we're focusing to a large extent on prevention and education. And often I find myself in front of groups just like you all across this county saying the same thing, that we've got to be aware of this issue. This is at a critical phase. It's a life and death matter, as Senator Lesser said, and we understand that. But I think we need to disabuse people of the notion that this is an issue that's confined to urban areas in this county, or it's the family down the street. We're all vulnerable. No one is immune, despite whatever our life circumstances are and whatever we're blessed to have. So I talk a lot about education and prevention, but I think we're doing our best to speak to groups of kids as early as 5th and 6th grade about this issue, about the issue of addiction, about what leads to it, about how easily it can happen and how it can surprise you. Furthermore, as Carl mentioned, we're forming a task force, which I think is going to be critical to coming out of this issue, to coming out of this malaise. And it's going to be members in law enforcement, but it's going to be the medical services community, Bay State Hospital, Mercy Hospital, Holyoke Hospital, and we're really going to be focused around three main kind of objectives. And one is data collection, because at the foundation we have to know what's happening. We have to know where the problems are, who's suffering from problems, especially with regard to investigations that my office would run along with our local partners. We're also concerned about consistent messaging, that we're not duplicating efforts, we're not, talking in ways that are inconsistent with each other across this county, and we're also talking about the consistent provision of services, and that goes from prevention all the way to addiction services. So that is going to be a critical piece of what we do in the future, and hopefully the hub of what we're doing in Hampden County. And I'm very fortunate to have elected officials, namely and specifically Senator Lesser, who has been a terrific ally to my office and to criminal justice in Hampden County, and he is a leader on this issue out in Boston. I know he's very outspoken and very vocal about this issue and what the needs are in Hampden County. So, we're focused on the prevention and education side, but we're also focused on the law enforcement side, which is really my core function as district attorney. And I talk about this a lot. I talk about some of the misconceptions around how we're dealing with this on the law enforcement side. Very often, we're charged with enforcing the laws, but we're now dealing with a public health issue. And of course, the data, the science, everything we now know is that this is a disease. This is a public health crisis. But nevertheless, people who are facing addiction or using drugs are often committing crimes. It comes part and parcel, unfortunately. So we're forced to deal with it. And with our legislators, we're equipping ourselves with the resources necessary. A drug court is in the offing, which I think is going to be important. But what I'm talking about fundamentally is the understanding that there's a difference between people suffering from addiction, people who are arrested with low-level possessory drug offenses, or the kinds of offenses that are clearly the outgrowth of addiction. When we talk about shoplifting and trespassing and breaking and entering and those kinds of things, which are serious, but often come as a result of a core problem of addiction. And for a long time, and certainly in my administration, we've done our best to innovatively and creatively and thoughtfully deal with these people in addressing their core problem and sending them to probation sentences, sending them to treatment, working with the Sheriff's Department and Sheriff Ash, in making sure that that core issue is resolved, hopefully, through their interaction with the court system. And it's one of those rare opportunities where our fiscal interests and our humanitarian interests align, where we understand that if we can solve that core issue that people are dealing with, addiction, Hopefully they don't come back and it doesn't become a revolving door in the courthouse. So we've done that for a long time, and when the drug court, I hope in this calendar year, is established in Hampden County, it's going to go a long way in providing those services we know are so critical to people dealing with addiction. But on the other side of it, like I talked about, there's a real separation often in the work that I do on law enforcement between, again, those people suffering and facing addiction from those people who are profiting from addiction. So I hope you've seen some of the work we're doing in the courthouse, again in partnership with our local law enforcement, with the Springfield Police, with state police and federal authorities in aggressively and swiftly investigating, arresting, and prosecuting people who are pushing these things, these awful poisonous drugs, into our neighborhoods, onto our streets, into the bloodstreams of people who are so vulnerable to addiction. And that's an important point, that the work that we do enforcing the law around people trafficking in drugs and selling drugs, I think is very important to getting out of this issue. But to be clear, we do have to focus on prevention, which comes first. We have to focus on working with people who are facing addiction, making sure they're getting appropriate treatment, and the work that we're doing now with our legislators and the work we'll do with the trial court is going to be very important in that fight. I am here to answer any questions. If any of you have any questions about the court system and what we're doing more specifically, Carl very sternly warned me I have no more than 5 or 10 minutes here. He made that clear to me, so I don't want to talk, and I know you have probably more compelling speakers you'll hear from tonight. But we're working very aggressively and very proactively on education and prevention. We're working through, eventually, our task force and with our partners in the legislature and in law enforcement to make sure that through the court system we're addressing people who have addiction issues and also dealing with people, again, who are profiting from addiction in trafficking and selling drugs. So it's a full court press, and I can only echo what Eric said, that this is really at a critical stage. It's a matter of life and death. Your involvement is so important to how we'll succeed in this and how quickly we'll succeed. I'm confident we will get out of this and we will make a difference in the near term. But we're working very hard, and I'm honored to work very hard as your district attorney on this issue and many others that face you here in Long Meadow. So again, thank you for being here. Thank you for spending some time in understanding this issue. We can only hope that you are now a savvy eye to this. You're aware of the issue. And with our work together, we get out of this awful situation where we're losing people literally daily. So thank you very much for your concern and your support.
Thank you, DA Glooney. I'm going to start my PowerPoint presentation. When Chief Stankwitz and I discussed what we wanted to put up, we wanted to put up a PowerPoint where we could advise the parents of some of the things to look for, provide some information that they might not have been aware of. And as DA Glooney stated, prevention. So hopefully what you're going to see tonight will at least give you some idea of what to look for around your house or your kids out there. So where does heroin come from? Opiates and heroin come from the opium. Opium is obtained from the opium poppy plant. The poppy plant is grown in Southeast, Southwest, and Latin America. 80% of the world's heroin comes from Afghanistan, but here in the United States, our heroin comes from Latin America. That is just because it's easy to get over here. They bring it over the borders through trucks, cars, human trafficking, or in boats. The drug cartels have switched from cocaine and marijuana to heroin because it's such a profit to be made on it. The steps in making heroin. The petals will fall off the poppy plant, exposing the pod. The farmer will slice a vertical cut into the unripe pod, and a milky sap will ooze out. The farmer will let the sap dry, and the next day will harvest the sap by scraping it off the pod. The farmer then forms the dry sap into a cake, a brick, or a ball for packaging. The sap is now considered raw opium. The raw opium then is brought to a lab and manufactured into heroin. Now this is the same as for prescription pills. Your opiates, your Oxycontins, oxycodones, they're all made by opium. So the manufacturers have their own fields where they grow poppy plants, and again, they get their opium from that location. Now, these heroin labs where it's grown, it's not a sanitary lab. They're not, grown. I mean, it's not manufactured in a big corporation. They're often manufactured in a jungle. I've seen them on the side of a mountain. Just anywhere the black market can manufacture them. And the type of heroin that you get is depending on what type of chemicals or what type of impurities they're adding to the raw opium to make what type of heroin they want. So, if you want the white heroin bases, which is what we have here, they'll be adding hydrochloric acid and different types of carbon solutions, ammonium, so to get that chemical base of what they're looking for. Your three types of heroin you're going to see is the brown heroin, which is on your left, white heroin, which is what we have around here in the eastern part of the country, and black tar heroin, which is primarily out in the western part of the United States. Brown heroin and black tar, again, are western United States heroin. Here in the eastern part of the country, we have the white heroin. And again, the colors are the way they are because of the impurities that the manufacturer is putting into the heroin to make what they were looking for. 80% of heroin users start using prescription painkillers like Vicodin, Oxycontin, and Percocets before they turn to heroin. Once users become addicted to painkillers, they turn to heroin because heroin is cheaper and easier to buy than prescription painkillers. Right example here are your opiate pain prescription drugs. You have your hydrocodone, you have codeine, which is in cough syrup, you have morphine, Oxycontin, Percocets, methadone, fentanyl. So all these contain some type of opium in it. And you might ask, why would somebody go from taking a pill to using heroin? Well, on the street, the price of a pill is approximately $1 per milligram. And the prices of drugs is just like going to like a Walmart or a Target. Depending where you're purchasing it is going to be the price, depending on supply and demand. So an individual could buy a 15 milligram pill, will cost them $15. Or on the street, depending on the price of the heroin, one baggie, which is 1 gram, could cost anywhere from $3 to $5 per bag. So you could get 2 to 3 bags for what it's going to cost you to get one pill, depending on what you're looking for on there. And again, to get these pills, either they're stolen, or people will get prescriptions filled by the doctors, and they'll go out and sell their prescriptions. So it's very difficult to obtain the medication and sell them on the street than it is to buy heroin. The number of deaths from prescription opiate pain relievers has tripled since 2001. 2001, we had just under 6,000 deaths from opiate pain relievers. In 2014, that number rose dramatically to almost 18,000. The number of deaths from heroin has increased 5 times since 2001. Again, just about 1,800 to 2,000 deaths in 2001. In 2014, to just over 10,000 deaths from heroin. And this is a crisis. If nothing is done, can you imagine 13 years from now where we have 40 to 50,000 people in the United States dying from a heroin overdose? The 3 most common ways heroin is abused. It is smoked. A user will heat the powder onto a foil, then inhale the fumes through a small tube. The tube is just a glass tube like this. It will have a filter inside of it, which looks just like a Brillo pad. And then your tin foil. It is snorted. Heroin users can sniff powder through a rolled up dollar bill. They can use a straw. They can use a hollowed out pen. And some users will even add water to an empty eye drop bottle, such as a Visine bottle. They'll shake the bottle up, let the heroin dissolve inside the bottle in the water, then they'll squirt the solution, squirt the heroin up their nose. Heroin can be injected intravenously or intramuscular. Again, here the user will take a spoon with water and heroin, they'll heat it up underneath the spoon, they'll take a cotton ball, they'll put the cotton ball on top in the solution, which will soak up the solution, and then they'll take a needle and place the needle into the cotton ball and then inject the heroin. Now, most people think they're going to inject into their arm. I've seen users inject in between their toes and between their fingers, into the side of their neck. So anywhere they can get a vein, they are going to inject heroin. And a lot of users will turn to different spots because the vein will collapse from overusage of injection. So it's one of the signs to look for. Some of the paraphernalia for parents to be aware of. Again, you begin missing spoons around the house. Your kids are, if they're injecting heroin, they're going to be using multiple spoons. You look for the packages, which is the white baggie with the skull and crossbones. The skull and crossbones is what a dealer puts on his brand of heroin when he's selling it. So he'll mark it. All it is a white little plastic bag like this with a rubber band around it. You look for needles. You can look for the powder substance of the heroin. Again, the Brillo pads for the filters for if they're smoking it. Cotton balls, excess amount of tin foil, the rubber bands, which again is how they will package the heroin. So again, those are some of the paraphernalia that's out there for users will have. There's some local street facts about heroin. Again, an individual bag on the street is anywhere from $3 to $5 a bag. And again, this price is even in the city of Springfield, from talking to the narcotics detectives, it can range even in the city at different prices from one end of the city to the other. But it's very prevalent in Springfield, so the price is going to be cheaper in Springfield. But again, one bag is 1 gram. Then if a person wishes to purchase 10 bags of heroin, they call that a bundle. And again, that is wrapped up as so with the little rubber bands. And that can run anywhere from $25 to $50 a bag. Again, you can see why this is much cheaper than out there trying to buy a pill of a Percocet or an OxyContin. Then a pack or a stack. Learned that the state of Connecticut calls 100 individual bags of heroin a stack, and here in the Springfield area they call it a pack. But either way, you see any of those terms, slang or anything, it's something to be aware of. And again, the cost can be anywhere from $250 to $350 a bag. Some slang for heroin. Now, when I called around and looked this up on the internet, there were 100, almost like a page and a half of different slang words for heroin out there. So some of the more common ones I've been told around here is dope. Dope is very general. I've heard it throughout my career used for marijuana. I've heard it used for cocaine. But they also use it here for heroin. H, again, a bundle, which is, again, what they're looking for. They might be looking for 10 bags. Or a B, a pack or a stack. Some of the bags that we've confiscated over the years, just to get an idea of what they look like. Here's the Hollywood bag, which became infamous in January with a rash of overdoses in the Hampden County area. Louis Vuitton. American Gangster. I know it's difficult to see, but it says it right across the bag. American Gangster. And On Point. Now, just to give you a quick little story, we had an overdose here in town where an individual was a professional. He was using heroin for approximately 2 years, unbeknownst to his family, until he had overdosed. And when the officers went into their room, they found hundreds and hundreds of used heroin packets in his room. So for 2 years, this individual was an addict, was able to keep it a secret from his family until he got that one bag of heroin that he ended up overdosing on. Just to give you a quick idea, folded up, they're only about the size of a quarter. They're not very big at all. And again, these don't have any markings on them. Believe it or not, these were actually found in Laurel Park. They were completely unused. Again, we don't know why they were there. Somebody must have obviously dropped them. But Suboxone strips, I actually was asked by Springfield detectives to bring up this topic. Suboxone is a form of a drug to help heroin users with the withdrawals of heroin and to get off of heroin. It does contain a form of opiate. And the reason why they asked me to bring this up is they look exactly like Listerine strips. And if a parent didn't know what these were, they would think their child is just taking a Listerine strip. But it's a form of an opiate. And they're saying what they're doing is they're getting these prescriptions on the street, and then they're selling them to people to get high off of. So it's just another thing to look for, and they all have the N2 on them. So if you see these around the house or you see them packaged in some way, you know what they are. It's really time to ask questions when you see some type of behavior in your loved one. Declining school attendance, unusual outbursts of temper, worsening personal and grooming habits, a normal prompt child becomes chronically late. Sunglasses are worn even when it's not bright out. Long sleeve shirts are worn when it's not hot. Not sure how many have seen the Cape Cod, Heroin on the Cape Cod program, but there's a good scene in there where one of the addicts explains how when his family found out that he was an addict, it was a hot summer day, and his brothers began to question why he was wearing a long sleeve shirt. And obviously he was wearing that to cover his track marks. And his brother became very, very persistent on why he was wearing that long sleeve shirt, and that's when his family found out that he was an addict of heroin. The disappearance of cash and pricey items from the home. Again, unfortunately, when somebody becomes an addict, they become a different person. They begin doing things that they would probably never think of in their life. They begin stealing from their parents, from their grandparents, from loved ones, and they'll take these items and they'll pawn them down at the local pawn shops and get whatever they can for the money for their habit. They begin hanging around with new friends. They begin looking less clean cut, seem less motivated in school. They begin lying, secretive behavior, and they have run-ins with the law. Bottom line is, you know your kids, you know your loved ones. You know when something is starting to change, and again, you notice those changes. You start seeing any of the paraphernalia that I've already shown you. It's time to sit down and talk and ask questions. Very, very important law that was passed, which is the Overdose Immunity Law, or the Good Samaritan Law. This law protects anybody who overdoses on an opiate or heroin, and if they call 911 for assistance, EMS will show up, the police department will show up, EMS will transport them to the hospital, get them the proper treatment they need. The police department will gather up the paraphernalia that's at the house, and we'll take it back to the station. They are not charged, they are not summons in the court or anything. This is to help make sure people are getting the proper medical treatment they need if they're experiencing an overdose. Because too many people have died with their friends there because they are afraid to call the police because they think they're going to get arrested. So if this happens to somebody, pick up the phone, dial 911, and the appropriate authorities will show up. We did have an incident in town this year where we had an individual that overdosed. They was there probably about 2 hours before somebody had found him. Now, if somebody had found them early enough, they could have dialed 911, and that person could have been saved. Just a quick video for you to watch.
You and I are going on a difficult journey. The statistics alone are alarming. The number of heroin users has nearly doubled in just the past 3 years. Even more surprising may be the fix of the new addicts. Tonight, you're going to meet kids from families you never thought would fall victim to drugs. Families who did everything right, and still their kids are hooked. Believe me, this is a trip worth taking.
Literally just running. There's nothing I think that's going to work.
This is Ashley. She's just 21 years old and smoking as many as 100 hits of heroin a day.
I think when people look at me, they see that I live in a nice house, and that, I don't look like a heroin addict.
Ashley lives in a suburb outside Minneapolis. The idea that heroin addiction is reserved for the inner city is wrong, as you'll see.
Heroin is getting stronger and the users in the Twin Cities getting younger.
Heroin is considered the most addictive and dangerous narcotic, named after the word heroic, because it gave users the feeling of euphoric power. Today, heroin is worse than ever. Dealers have made it stronger, cheaper, and easier to smoke, a deadly combination.
With the hair like this, what I do is I take like a straw and I just
With just one hit, you could be hooked. Ashley puts the heroin on tinfoil, burns it, and inhales the fumes.
This is not supposed to happen to you. Too smart, too many people who love you, too much money and potential.
I never thought in a million years that I'd be that kind of person.
And neither did her mom Sherry and stepdad Paul, who say they were caught off guard by their daughter's addiction.
Oh, she's so animated. She used to do all kinds of funny things. She's a beautiful girl. She just had so many dreams, that any kid should have, and then it all just disappeared.
During Ashley's freshman year in college, as so many kids do, she experimented with drugs and alcohol. She says her friend convinced her to smoke what she thought was hash, a form of marijuana.
I mean, I didn't think hash was a bad thing. Then I found out what it was.
It wasn't hash.
No,
What was
it
it?
was heroin.
How long did it take for you to go from sampling it to being hooked?
Not very long at all.
She soon dropped out of college, quit her job, and began the life of a full-time junkie.
The first thing that I think of when I wake up in the morning is the last thing I think of when I go to bed. It's what my life is revolved around, is this drugs and just taking over, definitely.
And it's ravaged her inside and out, changing her voice, damaging her skin, weakening her immune system. She lives with her parents, cocooned in the basement in what she calls her dungeon.
This place has all the trappings of junkie life. I can smell it when I walk down the stairs. That's not from gardening.
No.
That is your soot. That's your resin soot from use.
That resin, the dark, sticky residue of black tar heroin, is everywhere, impossible to miss. Ashley says she hides the foil because she doesn't want her parents to find it in the trash.
Each little dot represents a hit.
How much do you take at a time?
I'll probably do like a day, so like 6 to 9 hits.
These bags are tiny balloons dealers use to package heroin. Dozens of empties hide in plain sight underneath a smiling Buddha.
And this isn't all, right? This is just...
No, that's just like
this is
probably a
just a
month's
sample.
worth.
And that adds up. At $15 a bag, Ashley has to come up with $1,000 a week to support her habit. Even more surprising than the price, the source. Most of the money comes straight from her parents.
You say, give me $40. And they ask why? And you say, because...
I'm gonna go do something with my friends, so that's usually what I say.
It's really not that simple, as you'll see later on. But one thing's for sure, the strain on this family is taking its toll.
I really feeling to know that's my parents' money, and it really sucks to know there's no one to repay me back.
As you can see, Ashley comes from a community very much like Long Meadow. The only difference is she's out on the West Coast. She's using black tar heroin, which here we have the white powder heroin, and it's obviously packaged different, but it's still heroin. And again, you can see she used it once, and she became quickly addicted to heroin. It doesn't take long at all. And the other thing, too, is, the opiates. Can't express it enough to be very, very careful if your child gets a sports injury, if you have back surgery. It doesn't take very long at all to be taking that prescription of oxys or Percocets, and next thing you know, you don't realize it, and next thing you know, you become an addict. The last is, if any parents out there suspect or even have any questions, you're more than welcome to call the police department, and we'll assist you in either finding the resources or even finding out if your child is using any type of opiates or heroin. I'm going to turn the presentation over to Dean Godfrey. He's a firefighter and paramedic here in Long Meadow to discuss Narcan. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to give a brief talk about Narcan and how we use it here in Long Meadow between the fire department, the police department, and you as the general public, and how we can work together to get through this crisis. The Long Meadow Fire Department's been in ALS service for about 15 years now, and the paramedics on the ambulance have been carrying Narcan for those 15 years. About 4 or 5 years ago, as the senator stated, the laws and legislations changed, and we started training all the members of the department to carry Narcan and use Narcan on the ambulance. All of the vehicles, including the fire trucks and all the emergency response vehicles that could respond to a call on a first due basis, have Narcan in them, along with all the police cruisers also. So if you call 911, which we were discussed about earlier how important it is, Narcan is going to be showing up at the door. One of the biggest misconceptions of Narcan that I find when I give these talks to places is that a lot of people feel that Narcan, once it's administered into the bloodstream, gets rid of the opiates. Narcan does not get rid of the opiates. As the second one there has a high affinity to opiate receptors, all the Narcan does is attach to the same receptors as the opiates and blocks it. And we're going to discuss here a little bit why that's important and what the relevance to that whole thing of it is that people think that once you give it, you're perfectly clear and everything's going to be perfectly fine. I want to leave that misconception and explain to you why. Most time when you give Narcan, the onset is about 1 minute to 5 minutes. And the duration lasts about 45 minutes. The reason that we're going to show you some videos coming up how we give it and how you give it out in the public is through an atomizer with a syringe. The reason that we do that, there's no needles involved. It's fairly easy to give. There's no risk of giving it. And just about anyone can be trained how to do it in about 30 seconds and give it effectively to anyone. And it's relatively painless. Again, we're not doing any needles or anything like that, so giving it to the victim that's unresponsive or having a reaction is fairly simple. They did a study a few years ago where they were trying to decide whether they wanted to give it nasally or not, because there's always been some controversy if nasal Narcan was as good as giving it IV or IM like they do in the hospitals. So they did a study, and what they found out was that giving it nasally while they were preparing to do it the other way, 83% of the victims woke up just by the nasal Narcan before they could even get the IV or the IM shot in. As the senator said, it has around a 96% success rate, and that number is still good. This number is just showing you that in that study, before they could get to that point, 83% of the people woke up. Why is that important to you? If you give it through that, you have an 83% chance or 96% chance, depending on the study you look at, to wake the person up and get them out of the opiate problem. The other 17%, you can see here, there was a couple of variations as to they had nose trauma, bloody noses, so forth, so they couldn't do it effectively. These are the kits that we carry. The one on the left-hand side, I've actually got a couple of kits here after the talk. We'll be around. You can ask myself or either firefighters if you actually want to see one of these kits, open it up and actually set it up. We'd be happy to assist you with that. The one on the right is the little kits that we carry in the fire trucks and the police cruisers. And we have one at the fire station if somebody does happen to get dropped off and we're on our call with either vehicles. We do have Narcan available to us. So when you give Narcan, we kind of discussed earlier that you want to call 911. Remember I talked about the onset of the medication is about a minute in the last 45 minutes? You want to call 911 as fast as possible. Number one, if you don't have Narcan available, you want to get Narcan on board. When you stop breathing and you're not producing oxygen into your brain death starts in about 6 to 8 minutes. So the faster you call 911 and the faster either the fire department or police department gets there, we can administer Narcan, the better off the person's survivability is. You want to support their breathing. Mouth to mouth is the best way to do it if you can do it, or try to lay them on their side, tilt their head back, and try to get them breathing if you can. If you have Narcan available to you, we're going to show you here in a little bit how to administer it. You want to administer Narcan as soon as possible. That's what the kit looks like assembled, and that's the one we have here. That's one that we carry on the fire trucks and all the cruisers. It's a single-use setup. It's disposable, so once you use it, we're going to throw it away, and it fits on most syringes. The atomizer on the end of it will screw into regular syringes, the pre-filled syringes that we carry, or any other type of thing that's distributed out to you. They come in 1 to 2 milligram solutions depending on how you get it and what it's supplied with. We're going to have a video showing you how to give it. You're going to give half the volume up one nose, then you're going to put it in the other nose, give the other half the volume up it. Even after you give it, you still want to support the ventilations for 3 to 4 minutes. Like the slide said earlier, the onset's about a minute. We usually find at 3 to 4 minutes, the person will start waking up and breathing on their own. For the first couple of minutes, again, you want to support their ventilations, because like I discussed earlier, 6 to 8 minutes, you brain death. So if it takes you a few minutes to get it, then you give it, and there's nothing going on, and you wait that time, you can start having some damage that you can't reverse. This is the instruction kit that's distributed with most of the Narcan kits that are available to the public. It's pretty simple to put together. I'm going to show you a video where someone's actually going to set it up. You pop off the 2 yellow ends. You pop off the end cap on the glass tube. You put on the atomizer, screw the vial into the syringe, and you just push it up, and it's very simple. So the other question is, what does Narcan doesn't work? Again, you want to support the breathing. You want to put the patient on the side. One of the common side effects of the opiate overdose is they vomit. And if they're laying flat on their back and they vomit, all the vomit's going to go back down through their lungs, and it causes a lot of complications down the road. We discussed earlier that years ago, there's a big problem with people wanting to call 911 when somebody overdosed because they were afraid that they were going to get in trouble, their loved one was going to get in trouble, something bad was going to happen. So people didn't want to call 911, or they debated about calling 911 a long time. I've been on calls where they've waited an hour or 2 before they called 911, and by the time we get there, unfortunately, the person's already passed away, and there's nothing we can do about it. The important thing that I want you guys to remember through this whole thing is that make sure you call 911 as soon as possible, because there is no consequences for anything if we show up and we find narcotics on the person is overdosed. The best thing you can do is call 911 and get that person the help they need. Again, dosing, whatever vial they have distributed to them, or as a family member, you're going to give half up one nostril, half up the other. You want to give the Narcan as soon as possible. Successful awakening, people think it's not like in the movies where you give the medication, they instantly jump back up and everything's perfectly fine. It takes a while for it to take effect, and they usually come back out kind of out of it a little bit and a little bit groggy, and they kind of wake up nice and slow. Don't think just because you give it that within 30 seconds they're going to come popping back up and be talking to you and everything's going to be fine. It takes a little while to do it. It's not always 100% effective, and the key point with that is, like I said, call 911. Even if you have it in your house and you give the Narcan, and the person wakes up, as I discussed earlier, the onset lasts about a minute to 45 minutes, but that also depends on the person, how much they've taken, if they built up a tolerance to the Narcan. You can give the Narcan, and within a couple of minutes, I've seen patients go back out again. You don't want to just think that everything's perfectly fine. Like we discussed earlier, that the Narcan is not getting rid of the opiates, it's only blocking the receptors. So depending on how long it lasts and how much is in there, it can come back onto the receptors.
So my name is Sarah Mackin, and I work for the Addictions Bureau at the Boston Public Health Commission. We're going to be talking about Narcan and overdose prevention today. Narcan or naloxone is a life-saving medication that can be administered nasally via a spray that can actually reverse the effects of an opiate overdose. So this is one full dose of Narcan. These are all the 3 pieces that come in each dose that we give out down the ABLE, the Needle Exchange Program. And the way that you put this together is super simple. I'm going to take the applicator, and I'm going to take these 2 yellow pieces off that you see here. So the first one, and then 2. And you'll see that there's a tapered end here and an open end with a needle, and that will allow this applicator to access the medication. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this vial of medication, and I'm going to pop off this cap. It'll be either red or purple, and I just grab it underneath and put my fingernail underneath, pop it straight off. Then on the inside you can see the rubber grommet. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put the 2 open ends together like this, really gently, and twist until I start to feel a resistance. Then I'm going to take the atomizer, and this turns the liquid into a spray and allows the liquid to go up through the nose and enter through the mucosal membranes, and then enter and pop the opiates off of the receptors in the brain. So I'm going to take this atomizer and twist it on the top like this. Now this is one full dose, it's ready to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and administer it and spray half up one nostril and then half up the other, the whole thing. How we train people to respond in case of an overdose is to first recognize the signs of an overdose. And there are really 3 things, 3 fundamental things that we teach people to look for. Is one, we say look for blue lips and fingertips. The second thing that we teach people to look for is whether or not the person is responsive. If I, verbally ask someone, are you okay? And they're not responding to me, my next step is to go physical. So I'm going to give them a shake, a really gentle shake. If they're still not responding to me, the last and final way that I'm going to know if that person is overdosing or not is I'm going to do a sternum rub. So I'm going to bring my knuckles up like this on my hand, and I'm going to rub hard and fast on someone's sternum, on their breastbone, or underneath their nose if you can't get to this area. If they're not responding to me when I'm doing that, I know that there's a problem. The third thing that we look for, and this is really the key around opiate overdoses, is respiration. So if the person is not breathing, or has labored breathing, or has a sound in the back of we call it the death gargle, the death gurgle, in the back of someone's throat, it means that the body is actually struggling to get oxygen into their system. So we know that those three signs together, and we're sure that that person is starting to overdose. So with Narcan, the reason that we're able to give this out to folks who are either actively using, or family members, or people and loved ones of folks who are active drug users, is that this medication has no adverse side effects. All it does is takes the opiates off of the brain receptors and allows the person to start breathing again. I don't have anything on my system right now except a lot of caffeine. If I push this up my nose or administer this to myself, all I would get is a runny nose. There's no indication, there's no contraindications, there's no problems with administering Narcan.
So Narcan's a wonderful thing. Again, the fire department has it, the police department has it, but you have to call 911 to get us there for us to help you. Don't be afraid to do it. If you have any questions about Narcan, if you actually want to see one set up and use it, see myself and the other firefighters after the speeches here, and be glad to help you.
The one thing I just want to add to Narcan, for anybody out there who needs to get Narcan for a loved one, I've spoken to the CVS here in Longmeadow, and the process is quite simple. If you go in and it's for yourself, the pharmacist can write a prescription, and they will bill your insurance company for the Narcan. If it's for a loved one or somebody else, again, the pharmacist can write that prescription. And she said the cost is around $30 for what CVS is charging for the Narcan. But they said it's a very simple process to get it. Our next speaker is going to be Marcy Julian. She's been recently appointed as the Western Massachusetts Regional Manager of Learn to Cope. Ms. Julian has been an active member of Learn to Cope since 2011 and is also one of the facilitators of the Holyoke and Pittsfield groups and a passive facilitator of the Worcester group. Prior to joining Learn to Cope as regional manager, she was an assistant district attorney with the Hampden County District Attorney's Office for about 22 years. Ms. Julian holds a bachelor's degree in history from Ithaca College and a Juris Doctorate degree from Western New England University School of Law, and is a member of both the Massachusetts and the Connecticut bars. She also is a member of the Western Mass Community Advisory Board to the Phoenix House and serves on numerous committees. She has been both a speaker and a panelist at many community events addressing addiction, and is also certified to train in the administration of Narcan and the opiate overdose reversal drug. Please welcome Marcy Julian.
Good evening. I'm very happy to be here, and I'd like to thank the Longmeadow Police and Fire Department for putting on this wonderful program this evening for the community, and so that all of you can take some information away that I'm sure will be helpful to you and to your families. It was nice this evening when I was out at the resource table for Learn to Cope, and I would encourage you before you leave to stop by if you have any questions or you want some more information, to talk to different people and kind of get a sense of who's in the audience tonight. And I know that some of you are here because you just want to learn more, and that's really commendable. I think it's wonderful. And some of you may be here because you have that uneasy uncertain feeling that maybe something is going on and you need to find out more about this and get the information you need to make some decisions and help somebody in your own family. And then there are others maybe who are here who are like me who live with addiction. If you are, I'm sorry, because it's a tough place to live. I was listening to all the speakers who came before, and you've gotten lots of good information, and I'm not going to go over the same ground, but there are, in fact, there are parts of this PowerPoint presentation that Detective Massafaro has already gone through, so I'm going to go over those quickly. But I just want to talk a little bit about the impact on the family and about Learn to Cope as a resource, and maybe share some information with you about how to have that conversation, especially maybe with an adolescent, and where help is available. But before I forget, because I will forget, picking up on the last presentation with Narcan, I'd like you also to know that at each of the 23 meeting locations for Learn to Cope in Massachusetts, overdose education and free Narcan kits are available every single week. So here in Western Massachusetts, if that's something that you would like to have, and I always encourage people to take advantage of that opportunity, because you never know whether or not you have an issue in your family. You never know when you're going to need it. And I love to use the example of the Learn to Cope mom from another group who was on jury duty one day and had her Narcan in her pocketbook and saved a fellow juror who overdosed during jury duty. So you just never know where you're going to meet someone and have that opportunity to save someone. But in addition to pharmacy access, there's also a standing order in Massachusetts at CVS and Walgreens, certain Walgreens, where you don't even need a prescription. You can go in and pay your copay, and Narcan is available to you. And you don't have to give an explanation for why you want it. You don't have to tell them who it's for. And you're supposed to get overdose education. So in a perfect world, it would work that way, and I'm sure in some places it does, in some places it doesn't, but I wanted to make sure you knew that, because it's a really, really important thing. Since Learn to Cope joined the Department of Public Health pilot program in December of 2011 or 2012, over 80 families in Learn to Cope have saved a loved one's life with Narcan. So that's 80 people who get another chance to get up and find recovery and get on with their lives. I'll tell you a little bit about Learn to Cope. It was founded in 2004 by a mom who, when confronted by her son's addiction, found that there just weren't the resources, the support, the types of help and information that she needed. So in a very grassroots way, she started a group. And since then, now it's 12 years later, as I said, there are 23 groups in Massachusetts. Recently, Learn to Cope got some funding from the Department of Public Health to expand the program to different parts of the state. So as I mentioned, there are 3 groups in Western Massachusetts, Holyoke, Greenfield, and Pittsfield, and hopefully more to come. And because of my personal circumstances, I left a career as an attorney and as an assistant district attorney because my son's addiction had such a huge impact on my life and my family's life that I decided that this was where I could put my abilities and talents to use. And I'm glad I had the opportunity to. I mean, life threw us some lemons, and I got a chance to make lemonade out of it. Tough way to do it, but that's the story. So Learn to Cope is for families who are affected by addiction. We're a peer-led organization. We're not professionals, but we have lots and lots of lived experience and wisdom that we put together over the years and that we can share with other people who are maybe new to this and need some support and need to get some hope that, you know, that life is, as they know it, is not over for them and for their families and for their family member who is struggling with addiction. We do a lot in terms of resources, because one thing you find out as a family is that it's very difficult to find information and to turn to the people that you ordinarily turn to for help. Really can't help you. I mean, if you go back, I mean, I think it would have been wonderful if we had an opportunity to go to a forum like this, but when it all started for us, this information wasn't available. So by hook or by crook, we had to kind of figure it out on our own. And it's very difficult to be alone with a problem like this because unlike other diseases, there's a lot of judgment and stigma surrounding addiction. And a lot of people are taking a long time to understand that addiction is a disease. It's not a moral failing. It's not a choice that anybody would ever make. You saw that young lady in the video. Who would want to live in their parents' basement like that? Nobody. So it's very difficult for families who tend to struggle alone and look for those resources, look for those information. So what we do to help those families is we bring speakers in twice a month who are either experts in the field of addiction, have information about treatment resources, different forms of recovery, be it medically assisted treatment or treatment programs. And we also bring in folks who are in recovery, and those are some of my favorites. Because a lot of them are young people who have managed to do what almost seems impossible to me, and that's to get their lives back on track, put their lives back together, and become some of the most wonderful people I've ever met. And they give back, and they give back, and what they give to the families is a great sense of hope for their loved ones. So you get a sense of what's available to you through one of these support meetings if this is where you're at in your particular journey. And I just wanted to make sure you knew about the Narcan being available through Learn to Cope. So I talk to families all the time, and our stories are different, but we have a lot in common too. And basically it boils down to addiction starts pretty innocently, I think, in most cases, particularly when somebody is prescribed a prescription for pain and becomes addicted. So my son was given a prescription following a dental procedure, and that's how it started for him. And you know, kids make bad choices and do some experimenting and make mistakes, but I don't know a teenager, including myself, who didn't make a mistake. What we hope for is that we can learn from our mistakes and move on with our lives, but the consequences surrounding opioid addiction are pretty devastating and not that simple. So it can happen to anybody. As I said to you, it's a disease. It is not a moral failing. It is not a choice. Addiction has no regard for your zip code, for your socioeconomic or educational background. It doesn't matter if you live in a beautiful suburban community, in an urban community, or a rural community. It's a disease that doesn't discriminate, and I'm sure everybody in here knows somebody affected by this, which is probably why you cared enough to come out this evening. The consequences are enormous. I don't know if anyone's had the opportunity to hear some of the presentations that are available now. Dr. Ruth Potee from Franklin County has a YouTube video on the biobehavioral disease, brain disease of addiction, and puts in very understandable terms. I would encourage anybody to go on YouTube and watch her presentation. In very understandable terms, literally that the brain of someone addicted to opioids is hijacked. Their lives are completely taken over and controlled by the drug. It is a very, very difficult problem, and it's a very difficult problem, particularly among our young people whose brains are not fully developed until well into their 20s. So they're really primed with experimentation or exposure to prescription pain medications to go down this path, which we don't want to see anybody go down. Families suffer too. There's a lot of, until we're able to learn and accept that it's nothing that we've done wrong, there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of guilt. I mentioned the stigma, the judgment, people don't understand. And, you know, I've often said if my family member was suffering from another disease like cancer or something like that, people would probably be bringing dinner to my house. Well, that doesn't happen to families who are struggling with addiction. And also, you know, it's pretty tough if you were to have a heart attack or another chronic disease. Addiction's a chronic disease, and like heart disease, like diabetes, like asthma. they all have roughly the same rate of relapse. I don't know what the percentage is, but they all have roughly the same rate of relapse. But if I went to the emergency room because I was having an asthma attack or another heart attack or having trouble with my blood sugar, I wouldn't be turned away or kicked out because I'd had something like a Big Mac to eat or something like that. I hadn't followed the dietary restrictions. I hadn't taken my medication properly. So, I mean, in a lot of ways, addiction is treated differently, even by our medical providers. So there's a lot of work to do. It's great that you're here tonight to learn about this and maybe gain a better understanding. And I wanted to kind of pick up on something that Senator Lesser was talking about. Data and statistics and research are pretty compelling around this, and I'm not going to go over all of that information, but I wanted to add a few more to that, just so you understand the gravity of this situation. In 2013, the federal organization SAMHSA determined that 15.3 million people ages 12 and older have used prescription drugs for non-medical use. In other words, for experimentation. So it's a pediatric disease. It starts very young with our kids. Opiate use is third only to alcohol and marijuana use in the United States. And why would that be? Well, I think it's because the picture that was up here before with the OxyContin side by side with the heroin. And essentially OxyContin, and I'm going to say it, I know it's true, is pharmaceutical grade heroin. It really is. I mean, besides heroin being cheaper, why do you think people make that switch? Because it has the same effect. It does the same thing. And with prescription pain medication, there's a perception, I think, that we all have, that because a pharmaceutical company manufactured it, and because a doctor prescribes it, and because a pharmacist dispenses it, it must be safe. Well, unfortunately, not anything is further from the truth than that. When we know that 1 in 6 people who take prescription pain medication become addicted, and that 33% of kids exposed in their teen years to prescription pain medication are 33% more likely to abuse prescription pain medication in their 20s. So, I mean, the numbers are pretty alarming. Senator Lesser mentioned that in 2014, 1,200 people died in Massachusetts of accidental overdose, and 4 people die every day in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Well, in 2014, 47,000 people in the United States died of an accidental opioid overdose. And those are just the numbers that we know about. So it's no small wonder that it's been termed an epidemic and a public health crisis. If you look at prescriptions written in the rest of the world, we represent a very small percentage of the world's population, but over 90% of the opioid pain medication prescribed worldwide is prescribed in the United States. 90% for this country alone. So you can see that the problem is multifaceted, that there are a lot of disciplines that need to get on board and make changes, and I think that the legislative changes are addressing that. And I guess I would just like to finish up with the statistics, with an admonition about not underestimating what the effects of early marijuana and alcohol use. We tend to be a little bit nonchalant about that. I don't think we should be. Somebody who uses alcohol or marijuana is not necessarily going to become addicted to heroin, but I've never talked to someone addicted to heroin who didn't start with alcohol or marijuana. And I think if you watch Dr. Poteet's presentation, that will make a lot of sense to you. So I've given you all this terrible information, but there's a prevention message here too. So what can you do as family members, as parents? You can first know that and accept that addiction can start innocently. It's not bad character, it's not bad parenting, it's none of that. Let's get away from that, let's get past that, and let's just understand the facts. This is dangerous and we should know about it. So if one of our kids has a sports injury or a surgical procedure, and a doctor wants to prescribe opioid pain medication, we're consumers, right? We can ask questions. So my question would be, what else can you offer that's not addictive? You know, back when my son was given Percocet when he had his wisdom teeth out, nobody, and I'm not really faulting anyone because I think our state of knowledge was different at that time. I do fault Big Pharma. That's a story for a different day. But, but I don't fault the medical profession because I think they were sold a bill of goods by Big Pharma. Nobody ever discussed with us the possibility that this had a potential side effect of addiction. I can tell you, I would never have filled that prescription had I had that information. Well, we know that today, so we can ask those questions. We can ask what else is offered. We can ask for smaller prescriptions. Maybe a couple of days on a prescription pain medication is enough. I don't need a week or 2 weeks or a month worth of OxyContin or Vicodin or Percocet after I've had a surgical procedure. Let me try something else. If it doesn't work, I'll call you. If you have to fill that prescription, please safely store your medication. Be aware that, as I think it was the detective who said, 4 out of 5 heroin users today got started on prescription pain medication that they got out of a family member or friend's medicine cabinet. This stuff is diverted from our homes. Realtors are now, across the Commonwealth, are doing educational programs to get medications out of the houses for open houses because people will go in just to look in your medicine cabinet. So please safely store your medications. Safely dispose of them when you no longer need them. Get them out of your house. Go to one of the police stations that has the drop box. And if you don't know where they are, I'm sure that Detective Mazzaferro can help you with that. There are drug take-back days, and I know that CVS is putting together a program to put the take-back boxes in their pharmacies. Monitor medication use by your loved ones, by your kids. Keep their prescription, make sure they're not taking more than they should be. And take your medication, please, only as prescribed. And don't share it with your friend who says, geez, my back is killing me. You know, here, try this. This really helped with my back problem. You could be handing your friend a loaded gun. It's not prescribed for them. You don't know what their family history is. You don't know whether they're genetically predisposed to addiction. So that's really important. Please don't share your medication with anyone. And intervene, as I said, if you're concerned about alcohol or marijuana use in your kids. It's important to know that, you know, unfortunately, that adolescent brain, when exposed to substances like that, are primed basically for later substance abuse in life. So with that said, I'm going to proceed to the PowerPoint presentation, and as I mentioned, some of this has been gone over before. So I'm going to kind of cut through some of it and get through it quickly because I know there are more speakers to follow me. But you know, it's fair to say that many people like me were shocked when I found out that this was going on in my family. But now when I look back, the signs, the symptoms, the paraphernalia, all the things that Detective Mazzaferro talked about, they were there, but I didn't see them. I didn't know how to put those dots together, hence the name, to connect those dots. But you have the benefit of getting this information now. So if you're seeing a combination of those factors around your house or with a loved one, don't be afraid to act and ask those questions, because I believe that if your gut is telling you something's wrong, it probably is. And the sooner that you can intervene and get somebody help, the better their chances are of finding recovery. Addiction is a chronic and progressive disease that's treatable, but if it's left untreated, it progresses, and in many cases, it's fatal. So, you know, I will quickly go over these. I don't want to go over in great detail because you've already heard it, but flu-like symptoms, diarrhea, vomiting, that kind of stuff is often associated with withdrawal. So if you're seeing that in combination with some of this other information, you might be concerned. People who use opioids get very itchy and often pick at their skin. So if you're seeing a lot of scratching and itching and scabbing, that's another sign. When using, people become flushed and sweat, can have watery eyes and a runny nose. One of the moms I know was convinced her son's allergies had gotten terrible. She was finding Kleenex all over the house. Well, that wasn't what was going on. Dark circles under the eyes. The tiny pinpoint pupils, that's really important, and I don't think that was covered yet. That's why I'm kind of going back over this, because there were a few things I think that I wanted to add. Opioid use causes the pupils to get very, very tiny. I could always tell when I looked at my son's eyes if he was using. It's easier to see in a blue eye than it is in a brown eye, but that is a real hallmark, and I hear it all the time from families in our groups. You know, we neglect ourselves when we become addicted to drugs. We don't take care of ourselves. We don't eat properly. We lose weight. Slurred speech. Opioids make somebody very, very, very drowsy. Well, initially very euphoric, very loud, and then as the high progresses, they get very drowsy, and there's that nodding off. It's almost like they're falling asleep. And of course, we've already heard about the loss of interest in our personal appearance, our hygiene. You heard some of the terminology used before, and I think that's particularly true of those secretive phone calls and text messages. If you're seeing some of that language and some of those abbreviations in the text messages, that's something to be aware of. Addiction is a disease that is shrouded in secrecy. It takes place in locked bathrooms, down in the basement, and at night, when we're sleeping, our loved ones are up using. And so there's a lot of secrecy. So if someone has gotten very secretive and is trying to keep from you what's going on, mood swings, as I mentioned, when someone is initially high, they become very euphoric. And then, of course, as the drug wears off, they can become very depressed and quiet. And have angry outbursts, staying up all night and sleeping all day. As I said, it's to hide it from us. And when someone is up all night, they tend to sleep very late. So a lot of the parents come and say, I don't know what's going on. You know, my son, my daughter, they're sleeping till 1, 2 in the afternoon. They don't care. They're not seeing their friends. They're not hanging out with the family anymore, all of these things. These are pretty clear signs. And unfortunately, theft, as the detective mentioned a moment ago, comes with it because it's a very expensive habit. I will pass over those. We've been through them. Some of the paraphernalia. So with the pills, these are opioid pain medication, and I only stopped to mention those because sometimes we see prescription bottles around the house that we don't recognize, or pills around the house we don't recognize, or even someone else's name on a prescription bottle. Razor blades are used for cutting. The hollowed out pen is used for snorting. You know, if you don't, you might have someone in the home with diabetes, and you may recognize this as a syringe cap used to inject. The foil we've been over to cook. The bottle cap for mixing the prepared drug, and also the bottom of a soda can or a seltzer can, that well is often used. So if you're finding like soda cans and water bottles in your bathroom, I might ask a few questions. The Q-tip stick can be used for stirring. The filters are often taken out of cigarettes. You heard about cotton balls from the detective and maybe Q-tip heads. And the cigarette filters are taken out. I personally was finding a lot of those. Missing a lot of spoons. Of course, that's a syringe. If like you might recognize it from if you have a diabetic in the home. And then, of course, to inject, a tourniquet is necessary. So this is a belt with teeth marks in it. I'd also add that those nice little bracelets that we hand out sometimes for causes, I have some of those out there. They act as a tourniquet. I don't know if anybody saw the HBO documentary from the Cape, but the iPhone chargers are frequently used. So, I went over it quickly because I don't want to repeat a lot, but those are the types of dots you want to connect to determine what's going on. So if you've decided that this is a problem and you need to make a plan. So you want to contact somebody that you trust, a trusted professional, and seek advice about treatment. Don't want to leave anything out. So that could be a counselor, a physician, a nurse, a social worker, a clergyman, someone you trust. Learn as much as you can about the resources that are available, because you want to have those numbers and those programs available when your loved one agrees that it's time to go to treatment. Sometimes that can be a very small window of opportunity, and you want to be prepared for that. And you can insist upon a home drug test, especially if your loved one denies that they're using. So, and I will skip over this. I told you about our nasal Narcan program. If you have an adolescent, and I'll go through this quickly, it's a hard conversation to have, but the governor put up a new website this past year with a lot of the same information. I think he got a lot of it from our PowerPoint. And we recommend that you don't discuss an abuse problem with an adolescent when they're high. You're not going to get anywhere. And you start by telling them how much you love them. You ask them about their hopes, their dreams, their goals, and get them to talk and tell them that you're worried about them based on what you've been seeing. You describe to them the signs and the symptoms that are causing you to suspect that something is going on, and that their drug use can have a negative impact on those hopes, those dreams that they have, and the serious consequences that go along with that. And guide your child to consider how this might change their plans, you know, their hopes for the future, maybe going to college, things like that. And suggest that you meet with a drug counselor or a doctor. If they refuse, make the appointment anyway. It's useful for you to go and have the conversation, and then tell your adolescent that you're going to go anyway, and that the doctor or the counselor is only going to hear your side of the story. They're not going to hear their side of the story. That may motivate them to go with you. And then supervise your child more closely and take away the 4 C's: cash, cars, cell phones, and computers. They all enable usage. And I said before, if they insist that they're not using, it's perfectly appropriate to insist upon a home drug test. You can buy them at CVS or any pharmacy. If you come to a Learn to Cope meeting, we sell these 12-panel drug screens for $15. I'm not here making a sales pitch, just letting you know we have them. These are some of the drugs that they test for: the opioids, benzodiazepines, you know, the medications prescribed for anxiety like Valium, Xanax, those things, marijuana and the synthetics, amphetamines. So if your loved one is using, learn as much as you can about the disease of addiction and find treatment. You can call the Substance Abuse Helpline for adults, and for young adults and youth, you can call this number at the Institute for Health and Recovery, and they're a referral to the state-funded treatment programs. And please be ready in case of an overdose. Take advantage of all the opportunities I told you about to get Narcan, and get trained in doing rescue breathing. And if you don't have that at your disposal, as the paramedic told you, probably the most important thing you can do is call 911. And get support for yourself and your family. Learn to Cope is one such option. There are others. There are resource tables out there. There's a parent support group of Western Massachusetts. There's Nar-Anon, there's Al-Anon. There are faith-based groups in the community, and of course there are counseling and other options like that. This is a picture that I include because it is a picture of prescriptions that were filled by one person who was able to go from pharmacy to pharmacy and continue to fill prescriptions. I think it's a pretty compelling picture. And last of all, please know that there's hope and that you're not alone. So thank you very much.
Our next speaker is going to be Nick Coisy. Nick grew up in Long Meadow and is a 2008 graduate of Long Meadow High School. In between Nick's sophomore and junior year of high school, Nick became addicted to opiates. In 2009, Nick went into recovery for his addiction And this upcoming April, I'm proud to say this will be his 7th year in recovery. Please welcome Nick Hoisey.
I really appreciate you guys having me and having this symposium, and I'm honored, humbled to be here. I grew up in Longmeadow, and a lot of people think, it's a city thing, but for me, it started here. I was brought up great. My parents were loving, did everything for me. I was a pretty spoiled kid. I got everything I ever wanted. I was an only child. That probably says it all. But my upbringing was great. There's no reason that I ever should have, turned to drugs. And I was the type of kid who said that, I'll never drink, I'll never smoke marijuana, all that. And I played hockey my whole life growing up, and my parents put in thousands of hours, dollars, and really took the time to give me that outlet to use in my life. And and those are my dreams, to play college hockey, obviously to go pro. And as soon as I think it was about at age 14, for some strange reason, I played hockey with these older kids. I played, I played for the Picks my whole life, Springfield Picks, and I ended up playing with kids older than me. And I think it was probably either the summer of 8th grade or right before my freshman year. I drank and I smoked marijuana for the first time. And the first time I got high, it was literally like I was on the top of the world. It was like the missing piece of the puzzle, and it filled that missing piece there. And I literally remember thinking to myself, I need to feel like this all the time, right? And I don't know if that's really a normal reaction for a 14-year-old kid to say that, but that's how it went for me. And like everyone was saying, it's progressive. Drug addiction is progressive. And did I think I was gonna, turn to opiates or benzos or anything else? That definitely wasn't the plan. And for a while, it was careless fun. And there weren't consequences. And I was still playing hockey, and I was still, getting by in school. I was never, a scholar by any sense, but, I was an athlete. And, being exposed to that, the next thing I tried was Xanax. And for some reason, I was petrified of that word because I heard about it. And before you know it, I was taking Xanax. And as soon as I found that, mixed that with the marijuana, I was like, again, king of the world, right? Filled that piece. And then next was, the Percocets, right? I remember the first time I ever did them, my friend had had a bottle of them, and I'd never done them before, and I'm like, I'll buy the whole bottle off you. Before I even took them, and I bought the whole bottle off them. And again, you mix Percocets with Xanax and the marijuana, and that was the combination for me, right? That was the solution, right, to my life. And I come to find out that turns out the drugs really weren't the problem. It was my inability to live life, right? I was maladjusted. I didn't know how to live life like a sane, normal, rational human being, right? It's like the opiates, and they made me feel whole. They helped me deal with anxiety, fear, stress, insecurities, all that stuff. But they worked, right? They were the solution. So the problem was that my solution to my life wasn't healthy, right? It started to affect everyone around me, and for the longest time, I didn't want to admit that I had a problem, because that was the only way I knew, right? That's the only way I knew how to live. That's the only way I knew how to function. That's how I eat, sleep, be in social situations, play sports. I used to tell my dad that I play hockey better when I'm high. Like, you're insane, Nick. You know what I mean? You're insane. He'd be like, yeah. And with that, and with getting into the opiates and the benzos, those number one things in my life, which was hockey, quickly became less important, right? In my junior year, I was playing for the Picks, and I was playing for the junior team. When I was in 8th grade, I was playing for the junior team. I was 15 playing with, 20-year-olds, 16 playing with 20-year-olds, and then my junior year came along, and the drug addiction, took flight so much that, I quit that team because it was interfering, with my drug use. And, I would practice, 4 times a week and travel every single weekend. And I just wanted to, do drugs. And so I played for the high school that year, my junior year. And, it was bad. I mean, it was bad at that point. We talk about some of these warning signs, and, I didn't look good. I was probably, weighing in at like 140 pounds, probably like really pale. I probably had those bags under my eyes. And, but still at that point, like, I didn't really see it as a problem because I could always afford it, right? I would sell them to, afford my habit. I was no major kingpin drug dealer, that's for sure, but, I would sell it just so I could afford it. And it got to a point where I was taking, 10 to 20 Xanax a day, which is absurd. That's, 20 to 40 milligrams a day. Where a normal person who gets it prescribed to them probably takes like, 0.5 milligrams a day. That's crazy. And you mix that with, 10 Percocets a day, 30 milligrams, 300 milligrams, right? Or the oxys, 10 of those a day. And then doing coke here and there to stay awake so I'm not falling asleep, right? It was like a, constant grind, to keep that habit going. And, my senior year came around, and, I was gonna try to get my life back, in order here, and so I ended up getting on this team, one of the, good junior teams around here and actually in the country, and it was in the second best junior league in the country, the Eastern Junior Hockey League, and it was for the Falcons, the Junior Falcons, and I got a spot on that team, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna get my act together, right? And I didn't know how I really didn't know what it meant to be a drug addict. I could tell you that, even though I didn't want to admit it, I was a drug addict, but what that really entailed, the physical dependence and the inability to stop, no matter how much, I wanted to. And I was able to, control and moderate my use a little bit, do less. But, probably midway through that season, they were putting the team were putting all their effort into getting, the older kids into, college and whatnot, and I'm sitting there not playing. So, I'm gonna, lash out at the coach and, go get high. Like insane thinking. Like it gets to a point where, I'm in the midst of drug addiction. I'm completely insane. Drug addicts are completely insane, right? Probably nothing that came out of my mouth was ever the truth. It was pretty bad. But still, at that point, I wasn't done, right? Somehow graduated high school with passing grades, couldn't tell you how, went to prom, don't remember that. I was, I remember actually right before my prom, I only had a certain amount of pills, and I was gonna wait until the last second to do them, and I was actually, withdrawing before, and I threw up in my living room right before I got in the, the limo to go to my prom. Like, that's not normal, that's not normal at all. But still, warning signs for me, that wasn't enough. And I graduated high school, and then, that's when it got the worst, that summer after, my senior year. I was driving around every single day, selling drugs, getting high, putting myself in terrible situations. One night, I got robbed at gunpoint, pistol whipped, and then arrested, 2 hours later. Right? That's a real good night, right? Although they didn't actually put me in handcuffs and bring me to the police station that night because it was at Western New England College. They gave me a summons to court, and they gave me a restraining order. I can't go back there, right? 2 days later, what do? Drive back on the campus for 30 seconds to pick up, my friend and get pulled over again, search the car, find more pills, this time get arrested. And I actually, I'm pissed off, right? I'm not ready to stop, and I'm sitting in the jail cell in Springfield, and not once does this thought cross my mind like, wow, this is getting out of control. You should probably take a look at this. And the only thought that came through my mind was, they took all my drugs and they took my ability to get money for the drugs. How am I gonna keep getting high? And even though I didn't stop right at that point, that was the beginning of the end, and that was a blessing, right? Getting arrested was a blessing. As pissed as I was, then, that was the beginning of the end, right? That's when getting high became hard, because before that it was easy. There weren't any consequences. Yeah, my parents knew, but I was, rarely ever home, and I was unresponsive to any, reaching out to try to help me. And I was uninterested to that. And so that's when, I ended up getting put on probation. I went to treatment for the first time, after that. And really wasn't to get sober. It was just to get, the probation off my back, my parents off my back, kind of get some time away. And really what my goal was is to go there and get to this point of before I crossed that line, to where I couldn't stop, right? I wanted to be able to, just do it casually and this and that. And, with drug addicts, once that line's crossed, there's no coming back. I can't use in safety. I can't drink in safety. I can't smoke, marijuana in safety. So, I went there. It was a joke. I ended up, I wasn't ready for it. I ended up, leaving there, driving down to Holyoke with the 3 people that I met there, getting a bunch of heroin, going back, staying at a Rev Roof Inn. This is the night before Thanksgiving, getting high, in this hotel room, and then going back for Thanksgiving, the next day. My mom probably doesn't even know that story, but now she does. But, and so that's what, that's what that treatment looked like for me. I wasn't ready. And, after that, I obviously got kicked out of there. I ended up trying to do this IOP, ad care in West Springfield. I'd gone to my doctor, psychiatrist, and for me, none of that worked. I wasn't ready. And, at this point, I had, robbed every single person that I knew. I'd take checks from my mom and dad, write those. I'd take my mom's bank card in the middle of the night, go take out money. You name it, I'm doing it, right, to get high. Any way I can possibly get high, I'm going to do it. There's no boundaries. And that's what it looked like towards the end. I put myself in situations and places that obviously I should never be. And it was completely normal, and then it got to a point, in 2009, right around Easter, where, I actually got put on the color system, right, level 3 probation, and, and this is just a little story to paint to you how, strong, the mental torture of drug addiction is I was on the color system and I was getting drug tests pretty much every single day. So every night I had to call this number, and if my number was called, I had to go in there, and take this drug test the next day. And I was going to these community corrections center in Springfield. I was, doing community service on Saturdays, and my color was red, and it was the most frequently called color. And it was one day I had been sober for 2 weeks because, frankly, I'm petrified to go to jail, right? I grew up in Long Meadow. I'm, a skinny kid, picky eater. I like French fries, hot dogs, chicken fingers. And, they're not going to prepare that for me in jail. I swear I eat French fries like every single day. But, so I was petrified to go to jail, right? And, obviously I didn't want to crush my parents again. And, I'm trying to do the right thing. And, I'm hanging out with my best friend at the time, who actually still is to this day, and, we're driving. Mind you, I'm 2 weeks sober, right? Physically, I don't have withdrawals, right? I'm not, on a run or anything like that, and, I think it was a Thursday, and we were driving to the sub shop that he worked at, and I called, and they said the color for tomorrow is yellow, and my next thought was like, oh, I can get high tonight, right? Insane, right? I'm still that same kid who's petrified to go to jail, who doesn't want to hurt his parents. But that thought is so, overpowering, and that idea of getting high is so much greater than any, consequence. I'll deal with the consequences later. So I did, right? And that was towards the beginning of the end. And I hung out with, a lot of people who sold a lot of drugs, and I ended up getting pulled over by the, the Springfield Drug Task Force right before the end, right? Why is a kid, from Long Meadow, putting himself, with people who sell a lot of pills and all that stuff. And, obviously I had no business being there, but that's where it takes you, right? Like it was said, it doesn't matter where you came from, what your background is, how much money your family has, how big your house was, it doesn't matter. And I was sitting there, and they ripped us out of the car, brought us to the station, and the guy said, "Why shouldn't I arrest you?" And I was on probation, right? Level 3 probation. If he arrests me, I'm going to jail. And I had one Oxycontin on me, and my friend had one on him, and for some reason I told him it was probably just to get out of jail there. I was like, because I'm a drug addict, I don't sell these things, blah blah. And for some reason I think he knew my dad and he knew my friend's dad, and they let us go, right? Let us go. And I left there, and again, right? You're being, pulled over by, and nearly arrested and nearly going to jail, and still, you're not going to stop. And it wasn't long after that where, it got to a point where, no longer was any amount of drugs that I could possibly put in my system going to do it for me anymore, right? And I was taking absurd amounts, really. And they just didn't do it for me anymore. No longer, like I was talking about before, they were the solution. No longer were they the solution anymore. I just had to do it just to function and to get up and to breathe, really. And luckily, it was Easter of 2009 where it was the last day I actually ever got high, and it was the day after, and my dad was actually driving me to Stick because I was trying to get my act together again, and I wasn't able to, and I texted my mom, and I was like, "Mom, I think I need to go to the hospital, right, to go to detox." Couldn't even tell my dad because I was ashamed, right? And I texted my mom, who then I think texted my dad or called my dad while I was sitting in the passenger seat, and bizarre, and luckily, I got to a point of complete brokenness and desperation, right? I like to say it's like I was like a beach zombie whale, I was a useless, waste of life. I was I sucked the life out of every single person that came in contact with me, really. I took their time, I took their money, I took their love, and thank God I was broken, right? Thank God I was finally starting to feel the actual internal consequences of, what I'd been doing. And, and luckily, things fell into place for me at that point. And, my mom's boss's son had been sober for years, so I ended up getting sent to this place on the Cape, and then ultimately getting sent to this place in New Hampshire, which is the Plymouth House, and, which I was taught how to live, right? Because in reality, there's really no quick fix for this. I can't just take a pill and get over it, right? I can't just take a shot and get over it, unfortunately. I've sickened myself to the point of no return. And how did I do that? By action, right? I took action, right? All that action led me to that point of brokenness. So how am I going to get out of it? I need to take some action, right? I need to take responsibility for my action. I need to take a look at the situation, right? And that place, showed me how. And I ended up moving up to the Boston area, and living in this community that promoted doing the right thing, right? Because I don't have the luxury to live the same way just by not, I can't live the same way and just not use drugs. It doesn't work like that, right? I have to completely change, right? Because I had completely changed. And luckily there's a community out there that helped me to achieve that, right? And from that point on, I really hit the ground running with this, and I really, I did what I had to do, and I continuously do what I have to do because I know, right? I know how that felt, right? The last day getting high was the worst feeling. My friend had called me and asked me if I wanted to go out and get high, and I didn't even have the strength to leave my house and go meet up with him and go get high because I was like, what is that even going to do anymore? the one thing that makes me feel okay and makes me feel whole isn't even going to do anything for me anymore. That's a pretty terrible place to be at. The one thing that helps me deal with every aspect of my life doesn't work for me anymore, and that's pretty sad. So I hit the ground running, and I tried to become a productive member of society and give back, and act my way into being a good human being again. And along the way, I started volunteering for the Special Olympics. Right, I've been coaching Special Olympics basketball for the past 5 years, every single winter. That's pretty cool. I've been a good employee. Right, I've never been late. Right, I don't call out. That's insane because I never had a job before. Like I said, I was spoiled. Right. I have real friends, right? Real friends who will take the shirt off their back for me, and I'll do the same for them, right? Because a lot of people that I hung out with when, I was in the midst of it, weren't my real friends, I have real relationships today, my mom and dad. My mom gives me a key to her house, lets me come in whenever I want, right? That's crazy, right? She lets me be there when she's not even there, I was just able to buy my first house, right? 26 years old, 7 years ago. If I told you that I'd be standing up here today, okay, right? That's not even fathomable, because I didn't think that I really didn't think there was a way out. So, I'm just here tonight to hopefully I gave you guys some insight on the actual drug addict's perspective, because we heard a lot from, all other perspectives, and to give you guys hope that there is a way out. And if there's anything that I can do for anyone in this room, the community, wherever, I'm willing to do whatever I can to help, because that's how I stay well today is, by being of service, helping out others. And that reminds me, where I came from, So thank you for this opportunity, and have a great night.
Again, thank you, Nick. Our last speaker tonight will be Shelley Warren. Shelley has been the Substance Abuse Response Coordinator here at the Long Meadow Public School Systems for the last 6 years. Please welcome Shelley Warren.
I had a brief PowerPoint, but I'm just going to skip it. A lot of the things I was going to say have been touched on, but I wanted to let you know, for those of you who don't know me, that we have support here available to you at the school. Megan Roy is here, who's our health teacher. One of our first lines in the school system is prevention efforts. She actually shows the full video that you showed a clip from as a part of the health program at the high school. We provide support for students who need it, who are dealing with this issue personally or in their families. We have a support group here for students who are affected by a family member's use. And I have to say, last year, in the 6 years that I've been here, is the first time where more than 50% of the students in that group were affected by somebody's opiate addiction and not alcoholism. Whether it be a siblings or parents. So it's something that affects our community and that we see here in various forms. We are in the midst of extending our prevention effort by trying to get a community-based coalition off of the ground. So that's the biggest thing I'm going to share tonight. We are trying to organize because I think it's been wonderful tonight to hear the police perspective, the law enforcement perspective, the perspective of somebody who has struggled with addiction, the parents' perspective, and I feel like addiction becomes the elephant in the room a lot of the times, literally, but we all have different parts of the elephant based on where we are. So the goal of a coalition is to bring together the people who see the different parts of the elephant and then share what we know and share our resources and try to address it more effectively in the community. So we're reaching out now for people who might be interested in volunteering to be a part of that coalition. Our first meeting will be 2 weeks from today here at the high school in the BTC, which is beyond the pool, the Business Technology Center. So if you're interested in rolling up your sleeves and really doing something to try to help address these issues in the community, the coalition's the place for you. We need to have 12 different sectors represented on the coalition. So please speak to me, and there will be a couple of volunteers also available at the tables in the back. We have a place to sign up and leave your email if you're interested in being involved. But we'll be using a model that's endorsed by SAMHSA, and it's a community coalition model that involves first doing a needs assessment in the community and really putting the different pieces of that elephant together, and then figuring out where we can strategically focus our efforts. We'd like to have the coalition up and running, quickly, and we do have an eye to being eligible for the next grant cycle. Coalitions are the source of, funding streams federally for prevention efforts. So that's something that we've just started working on, and if you're interested, please let me know. And we have information in the back. And if you are a parent and there's something happening in your family related to any of the issues that have been discussed tonight, please feel free to call me. I'm happy to speak with anybody and point them towards the resources, many of which have come tonight, and to just be a support in any way that I can in the school environment. So thank you very much.
I'd like to thank everybody for coming tonight. It's going to conclude our symposium. You're more welcome to stay behind and speak and ask questions amongst the speakers, or take advantage of the resources outside. Thank you very much.